Hello, my name is Brian Bowen, and welcome to Apologetics 101. I am your host, the resident Christian apologist. Alright, today we are going to be doing a debate review between Ken Hovind and a guy by the name of, at least his YouTube designation appears to be Professor Dave. I don't know if he's really a professor or not. But it's a debate between them on modern day debate, and we are starting right now. Alright. Yep, like I said, it's between Ken Hovind and Professor Dave on modern day debate, and it's a creation versus evolution debate. We have to mention that part. It's a creation versus evolution debate, and it was a really lively one. This Professor Dave guy, I've never really heard of him before. I'm not a huge fan of Ken Hovind's. I don't agree with all of his arguments or like all of his tactics, but he actually did a pretty good, decent job in this debate. I thought he did pretty well. He was able to maintain his calm and contained, which surprised me because his opponent, Professor Dave, he kept making ad hominem attacks against Ken Hovind, calling him uneducated, simple-minded. He lost his cool several times. He kept trying to talk over him, kept interrupting him, and trying to dominate the conversation during the crossfire section. So it was that kind of stuff usually is like pet peeves of mine. But strangely enough, he kept his cool. He never lost his temper. He never got mad, or at least seemingly got mad about it. He did let James know that he's just started controlling the situation, but James did step in there a couple times. James Coons, he did step in there a couple times, having to moderate the debate because like I said, this probably Professor Dave. I think Professor Dave said this was his first debate. It does show too because he was making logical fallacies after another, not just ad hominems, but he was making appeals to majority fallacy. I saw a couple of red herrings. I saw a straw man argument. He would misrepresented his own position on evolution because what evolutionists actually claim and believe. And Ken Hovind actually showed this when he kept asking questions during the crossfire section, and at one point he trapped him into a answer. I say trap. I don't mean that in a bad way. What he did was he basically he showed that his answers were not adding up. And one minute he says, "Oh no, evolutionists don't really believe this," and he said, "Okay, this is what the textbooks are saying." And he would bring up a slide and stuff like that. Do you believe this? Do you agree with this? He goes, "Oh yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with it. Ultimately, yeah, over millions of years. Okay, then then you ultimately believe that comes down to you believing that dogs eventually turn into these other animals. Well, we don't, and it's just his answers weren't consistent with each other. And so Kitch kind of showed that during the debate. And so he actually did a pretty good job with it. Kit did. Like I said, I didn't agree with all of his tactics or arguments, but and like I said, I'm not a president of his fan club or his biggest fan or anything like that, because there's several things that the way Kent positions his because Kent argues his position a lot of times. It's usually different from a lot of young Earth creationists. So I'm not really, but I'm not opposed to the guy. I'm just saying I'm just not in favor of him. But I definitely thought, or in favor of him all the time. But I definitely thought he did a pretty good job in this debate. And overall, I liked it. It was a very lively discussion. They said so also in the comment in the crossfire section. James mentioned that too. It was a pretty good debate, in spite the fact that Professor Dave, they were debated before, made lots of ad hominems. But Kent never lost his cool. He was very calm. He was very contained. I was really impressed with his mannerisms during the debate. I don't know if it had anything to do with the Christian character or the fact he's had years of experience of dealing with debaters. I'm sure he's been in hostile situations where people, he's been in situations where everybody in the audience disagreed with him. So, he's probably had lots of experience of being able to control himself in those kinds of situations where people were attacking his intelligence, and it didn't seem to bother him that much. It would bother me because I'm a smart guy. I've got lots of books all the way around. I'm not uneducated. I've got an associate's degree now. I am on my way to get my bachelor's degree. I'm also registered. I got 6 more classes to take. I got to pay them out of pocket, so it's going to be a slow thing. But I got only 6 classes left, and then I'll have my bachelor's degree. 2 of them are major classes that I have to take, and the other 4 are going to be free electives. And then once I do that, I have my bachelor's degree, and then I'll go for my master's. I'm not a stupid person, but someone like that, if he was to debate me, he would probably likely say, "Oh, you're uneducated, you're simple-minded because you don't agree with me, you're stupid," and all those things that are just not true, and they're just ad hominems. They really deviate away from the issues and stuff. Now, in this debate discussion, I'm not going to be doing a review of the entire debate. What I am going to be doing is a review of the opening case. Nothing else. The opening case that Professor Dave had made. I will deal with some issues and stuff during that opening case that he raises up throughout his debate and throughout the debate, and later on down the road as well. And I will be able to raise up those kinds of issues, and and we're going to have a discussion. And I've never done, as long as I've had this channel up, I've never done one on evolution specifically. So this will be the very first video ever touching on the subject matter. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not experienced at it. I don't think I'm not experienced at it, or I haven't debated other people over it. I have, and I am very knowledgeable of it. But the fact of the matter is that in this particular Apologetic YouTube channel that I have, I've never actually done a video yet. So this would be interesting to have an actual video up of this. Alright, well, let's dive in.
Let's begin by stating that evolution by natural selection is an observable fact. Expose some bacteria to antibiotics, chance mutations lead to resistant ones, the rest die, and soon they're all descendant in the resistant ones. That's evolution by natural selection. Speciation, or the production of a biological species, is also another.
Alright. Okay, let's start right there. Evolution is not an observable fact. There's a thing that he does where he conflates. Well, actually, all evolutionists do this. He's not the only one who does it. Conflates what evolution is called microevolution and macroevolution. He never brings these terminologies up here. To be honest, as little information as he seemed to really know about evolution, because he doesn't seem to understand that they do actually claim that the major classes of classifications originate from common ancestry. He doesn't fully grasp that, or at least he doesn't seem like he does. because he will argue things like, "Oh, well, we're just talking about moderate changes within a." No, they're not. No, they're not. They're talking about major changes. They're talking about the major classifications like Homo sapiens and things like that, and all these family groups. They originated from a common ancestor, according to the theory of evolution. Okay, this requires additional information. Okay, speciation is when species are being created, or not created, but basically coming down through means by which variations, small minor variations, are happening within a kind. There's no additional information being added. Now, he will say later that species cannot be formed unless there's additional information. That's not true. That's not true at all. There's lots of species of dog. A wolf, for example, is a different species of canine. The canine family. It's a different species of canine. But yet, it is considered still part of the same family. You can look at a wolf and you could tell it has dog-like qualities to it. I mean, pretty much can be sure it's not a bear. Okay, it looks very much like a dog. There's no additional information. There's nothing added to it. Okay, dogs already have fur. They already have legs, etc. All these things are true of dogs. They don't have wings or anything like that. Okay, so there's nothing additional added to the information. Microevolution, I think, is not a good term for it, because I don't really think this is evolution. I don't even think it is evolution. I think that a more proper term is probably going to be either variations. We talk about the genome varying, because the information inside our cells has a wide variety. Because I mean, we're talking about a lot of information here. So when you isolate all that information, what ends up happening is that's what natural selection does. It takes away from the information. Mutations don't add new information, but we'll get more into that later. He says speciation is an observable fact. He's absolutely correct. It is an observable fact, but it's not evolution. He'll call it evolution, and later on in the debate, he calls it evolution. He says, well, if you believe in speciation, then that's evolution. Then you believe in evolution. No, evolution is an adding of new information. Now, he tries to conflate these even further by thinking that the speciations add in new information, but they don't add new information at all. They always work off the same information that's already there. Small variations within a kind is not the same as, which is speciation, but it's not the same as adding new information to it, and it's not the same as evolution. When Christians and creationists talk about evolution, they're talking about what evolution is typically called macroevolution, which is the evolution of major classes of animals where additional information must be added in order to get all those major classifications. All right, let's continue.
Observable fact. We have observed the emergence of species of microorganisms, plants, and animals. We know so much about it, and we have terminology to describe the different kinds of speciation that can occur. If you understand biochemistry, none of this is surprising at all. DNA undergoes mutation. New genes means the expression of new proteins with the potential for novel functionality and eventually completely different organisms.
No, that's not the case. Again, they don't add anything new information to it. They don't become completely different organisms. Speciation is not the changing of something, of completely different organism. That's not what speciation is. Again, this is actually what's called the equivocation fallacy. It's also known as the fallacy of bait and switch. It's basically where you kind of switch terminologies here, and you're thinking, and like I said, speciation is not the same as evolution. This term microevolution or variations within a kind is not the same as evolution, macroevolution, what they call macroevolution, where they're adding new information. So this conflating terms. It's bait and switch. It's switching the terminologies around to make you think they're all talking about the same thing when they're actually talking about two different things. All right, let's continue.
This happens faster than one might think. Even a single point mutation can produce legs where antennae should be, additional sets of wings, and other remarkable changes.
Do you hear that? Additional sets of wings and other remarkable changes. Listen, I don't think he fully understands what additional of information is. I don't think he understands that when we talk about adding new information, we're not talking about adding something that's already there, because that's not new information, because the information is already present. Duplication of the information or replication of the information is not the same as adding new information. Taking information away definitely is not adding new information. He seems to think that later on, when he talks about an experiment, I think the guy's name was maybe Vector or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But later it'll mention a guy's name in the debate, not in the opening segment down evaluating, but later on in the debate he mentions the guy. And when I looked the experiment up, they took away the bacteria. He killed a lot of bacteria. They took away like certain things within the genome to create another form of bacteria, and then they say, oh, they created synthetic life. That's not the same as creating life in the first place. They're not creating life. In fact, even from what I understand, even the guy who actually did the experiment said that the media was sensationalizing what he was doing, because that's actually not what he was doing. But all he basically did was went from one form of one type of bacteria to another type of bacteria. And he did this by taking away information. He didn't create life. Okay? And you know, I think he seems to think that making an organism is creating life. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about life coming into being. Life. We're talking about, when we talk about abiogenesis, he's going to get into that. Going from non-living material to living material. Alright, let's continue.
Campbell responds by saying that these are different kinds of organisms. Well, what is a kind? This word is in the Bible, but it's incredibly vague. We can read about cattle, a creeping kind, and a beast kind. What is creeping? What counts as a beast? Who knows? Science is not vague like this. A species is a group of organisms capable of interbreeding. So if...
Alright, kind. Kind is basically best defined as a kind of a family group. You can define it as phyla. I think Dr. Jason Lau said it might be even more genus, I think it was, or something of that nature. But so it could be just maybe one step above phyla. You got family, and you got phyla, then you got genus. It might be genus, it might be phyla, it might be family. I usually describe it more like a family, but it could be one or two steps above a family. But it's more of a general category is what it is, and it does actually tell you what it is. It basically categorizes them based on, physiology, basically, and being able to bring forth after it, because people within that physiology can be able to mate and sprung new forms of that physiology. A wolf and a coyote and a dog can all mate with each other and produce half-breeds. But you can't get a, insect and a dog to mate and produce some, the new form of, insectimud or something, You can't do that. And so, it talks about, and so kind in the Bible is not that vague at all, actually. It's very explicit. But one of the things that people tend to confuse is they think kind and species are the same. They're not the same. Now, he argues here that, okay, if it's species, I think that's just fallacious. Well, yeah, I do too. It's not a species. That's not what a kind is. And he also tries to argue that if it's not a species, then he says if it's above a species, then that's evolution. No, it isn't. Again, this is probably bordering on his view that he thinks speciation is evolution, but it is not. It is not evolution. We do acknowledge that speciation happens. Absolutely. I don't know if he understands that we actually agree that speciation happens. But it's not evolution. Again, not evolution.
Organisms can produce viable fertile offspring. They're of the same species. So is a kind a species? Well, then the argument is false. Speciation occurs. There are new kinds. Is a kind some other taxonomic category, like a phylum or something else? Then that's no problem because it's...
Why is that the kind, if a kind is not a species, then the argument is false? He doesn't really explain that. Now, let me explain something on the open case. He is kind of bullet pointing it really fast, and because of that, I'm having to stop it a lot. It's unfortunate, but they only had 8 minutes for their opening case, so I can understand why he had to do it that way. I'm not dissing him for doing it that way. I'm just saying that he did it that way, and so I'm having to stop it a lot. I just thought I'd let you know that. But a kind is equal to a species. He says if it's not, then there's no problem with evolution happens. No, it doesn't. We agree speciation happens, but it's not evolution because nothing new is added to the genome. And I don't think he fully understands what it means when we talk about new stuff, because he talked about before all kinds of stuff happens, multiple wings, legs, all kinds of interesting stuff. Yes, but they already have that information. Duplicating the information is not adding anything new. Changing the information around is not adding anything new. Taking away the information is definitely not adding anything new. To add something new, think of it this way. This is what we mean when we talk about adding in new information. Evolutionists believe that reptiles evolved ultimately into birds, right? Alright, I think he's going to mention that later. But reptiles evolved into birds, according to theory of evolution. I don't believe that, but this is what theory of evolution says. Alright, well, in order for that to happen, there's a big difference between a scale and a feather. Alright? A scale is a hard part of a skin, and a feather is this complex, and yes, it is complex, mechanism that grows from a bird's body that allows it to fly because it's able to take in, when wind and air goes through it, it allows what's called lift, and allows them to be able to fly. And it creates kind of a light weight to them, kind of like a hang glider, just kind of lightweight. It allows them to fly over the ground. Alright. Now that's hugely different from a scale, which is just more like outside body armor, you know? And so there's different information there. There's this information that makes a scale, and there's this information there that makes a feather. Hugely different. Okay? In order for the scale to become a feather, you know, to lose the information for the scale and gain the information for the feather, additional information must be added. It's not just a change of information, it's not a duplication of information, because the information wasn't there before. The information to make a feather, information to make a feather is not present in the reptile. In order for them to evolve into a bird, that information has to be present, and therefore it has to be added, which is the one thing that they don't have, because no naturalistic mechanism, and I'm going to show that in a little bit, no naturalistic mechanism has ever given rise to information, new information. So where is this information coming from is the question.
Species always belong to the same clade. When eukaryotes first evolved, every descendant thereafter was a eukaryote, no matter what else they became. Animals always produce animals, mammals always produce mammals, and so forth. So if a kind is anything other than a species, this will not contradict evolution in any way whatsoever. Instead of defining the term, Kent will perpetuate the ambiguity of the Bible because he needs to blur its meaning to suit his argument. Now, if speciation happens today, it's logical to extrapolate that it has produced all the species that are already here. If this is
all right. It always must have happened in the past if it's happening today. I agree speciation has probably always happened, but speciation is not the development of major kinds of animals, because the major kinds of animals aren't species. Okay? When we talk about human beings coming from a common ancestor with apes, that's not the same as speciation. Speciation is when new species come to rise. Like a wolf is a species of the canine family. Okay, dog is a separate species from wolf, but yet they all share the same family. Okay, I mean it's pretty much looks like a wolf, or looks like a dog family. Dogs and wolves look like. Coyotes look like dogs and wolves. Very little difference. I mean, there's more similarity than there are differences. So, yeah, you could tell they're the same family, but they're different species. Speciation happens, not evolution. Nothing new is being added.
the case, there should be some evidence. For example, should there have been any intermediary species? Well, fortunately, fossils exist. And after we found enough of them, we were able to identify more transitional species than you can shake a stick at. We have fossils that bridge from fish to tetrapods, from land mammals to ocean mammals, from dinosaurs to birds, and every other transition you can think of.
No, they have not found transitional fossils. All the fossils that they've ever found has always been whole animal. And there's even been other evolutionists like Stephen Jay Gould, who was a lifelong evolutionist all the way until his dying day, said that even the few that has been classified by evolutionists, not by everyone else, just evolutionists, classified some of them, and some of them were even very disputed, and a few of them were hoaxes and things like that. But the ones that were classified by evolutionists as transitional have been so few and far in number. Because, okay, let me explain what a transitional fossil is. Transitional fossil, okay, evolutionists claim that the fossils eventually change to gradual changes over time until ultimately becoming some other major class of creature, and therefore we all share a common ancestor, is what they argue. All right. In order for that to happen, there has to be a chain, or at least what we would expect in a fossil record. There has to be a chain of transitionals. These are like these gradual changes, because the changes would have happened in the lifetime of, it would have happened over the course of other lifetimes. I mean, organisms were already died, so lots and lots of organisms would have died before these changes really start looking like they take effect. And they're happening over millions of years, according to theory of evolution. Now, I don't agree with this. I'm just basing this on what the theory of evolution claims and what evolutionists who believe in the theory are claiming. All right. A transitional fossil will be like a fossil found within the chain that shows these gradual changes into these species. Or not species, but these major classes of creations. Because it can't be just simply other species. It's got to be these major family classifications. Okay, because they're claiming these things have a common ancestor. All right, and as one evolutionist noted, it's like the entire chain is missing. It's not that this one particular animal, you can find one animal and say there it is. Even if you only have a couple, it's not enough to prove evolution, because you have to be able to show the whole chain. This is what's known as the missing link. It's basically the entire chain. The entire chain is the link that's missing. All we ever found is whole animal remains, and there's even been some hoaxes that have been done as well, like the Piltdown Man and others. There's even been some I think they found a tooth once, and they thought, oh, no, this really proves it's not transitional, finding a single tooth. Also, finding an anamorphic characteristic of an animal is not the same as, because I mean, those animals that exist today, they have anamorphic characteristics. Anamorphic characteristics are characteristics that are similar to other animals that an animal might possess. This is not the same as a transitional, because a transitional is a slow, gradual process from one to the next. This is not a slow, gradual process from one to the next. This is an animal that already has a body part that's similar to another animal. Similar to a duck-billed platypus, for example, has a bill of a duck and has webbed feet of a duck. And you got like dolphins and whales, so they look like fish, and you know, things like that. You got anamorphic characteristics. You're always going to have similarity to other animals, you know, things of that nature. But that's not the same as transitional fossil. I think there's one called, what was it called? I can't pronounce his name right now. I have to look at the word itself. It's like a long word. And it had like a tail of a lizard or something like that. That's not a transitional fossil, even if it wasn't a hoax. I heard something that might be a hoax or put together. I don't know if it was a hoax or not, but I do know that even if, let's assume that it's legitimate, it had the tail of a lizard, that would be a anamorphic characteristic, not a transitional fossil in the first place. So they probably classify that as a transitional, the evolutionists do, but it's not a transitional fossil. It's anamorphic characteristic. Transitional fossil, again, the slow gradual chain, the whole chain is missing. They have not found transitional fossils. They found a few fossils that they thought was transitionals, but they were not transitionals. They were whole animals' remains. What they have are images. Right here, this fossil right here is a dinosaur. There's no bird-like quality other than maybe if that's a pterodactyl. I mean, okay, so what? They had pterodactyls. They had pterodactyls throughout a lot of the different ages that they claim are, you know, dinosaur ages. So what? They didn't turn into birds. They've got bats today that have skin for wings. There's no feathers in them. Bats aren't birds. They're mammals, or at least they're classified as such. So, you know, so that doesn't prove a thing. They have to show them actually in birds. Why did they talk about why is he talking about transitional fossils and not present a transitional fossil? Why not show a picture of a transitional? You got all these pictures right here. You got these pictures right here. Why don't you show a transitional? You said there's transitionals. Show us some.
We also see that fossils deeper in the ground, which are older, are less similar to currently existing life, which supports slow change over time. This is such strong evidence for evolution that Kent will have to resort to claiming that the geologic column does not exist, but this is a baseless lie.
Alright, the geologic column actually does not exist. What they do, and this is a fact, I don't know why he says that. Well, he argues a lot of stuff that's not factually accurate. And he misrepresents people's positions. He even misrepresents his own. Well, this is the evolutionary position that he's trying to represent. But the geologic column, they come up with the geologic column by all these different types of strata all over the world. And then they take these strata and they put them on top of each other in a diagram that they call the geologic column. They believe each different section of strata represents in the geologic column different ages, which they may call epochs. But it's basically ages that they think that pass, you know, millions of years. This is coming from Charles Lyell and things like that. It's not even coming from radiometric dating. Charles Lyell actually came up with the geologic column long before radiometric dating was even discovered. I think radiometric dating came around about the 20th century, and he was Charles Lyell was writing around the 1800s. Same thing with Charles Darwin. He was roughly writing around that time and studying bugs, and supposed to be studying bugs, but he ended up studying birds instead. So roughly around that time, and but the geologic column is invented. You can't find it nowhere else. If it existed, it would be over 200 miles long. It would be thicker than, or deeper, however you want to look at that, than the Grand Canyon itself, as far as the amount of strata that would exist. But so it's not in existence. It is based on the strata all over the world, and of course it has lots of problems with it. For example, I think Kent brings up petrified trees, which is a good one. You know, the fact that there's petrified trees in setting up in the middle of these layers, that petrified trees can't stand there. Petrified trees, this tree that's turned to stone, it's sitting there in the middle of all these layers, and it just sits there for millions of years. No. There's also evidence, you know, the fossils are rapid burial. You know, for example, they found mollusk shells all over the world. Interesting thing about mollusk shells. Mollusks are like clams and things like that. When mollusks die, their shells close. Okay? Or not close, excuse me. Reverse that. When they die, their shells open. Okay? Another interesting fact is that the thing that connects those two shells is a soft part that actually would deteriorate shortly after it dies. Within a couple hours, it's gone. So what we should find, if these are millions of years, if these are just, you know, gradual build up of rocks over millions of years, they create these layers. And if that's true, and these fossils that's within these layers are millions of years old, and if that's true, then what should happen is that we should find these two shells separated from each other, fossilized independently. Very few have been found like that. The vast majority of mollusks is found not only with the two shells together, but closed. What does that suggest? It suggests rapid burial is what it suggests. And mollusk shells are the most common of the fossils in the fossil records. The most common fossils found, well, the most common is marine fossils, which these count as marine fossils. But the most common among the marine fossils is mollusks. And they're found all over the world. Just like that. Closed. Fossilized together. Which strongly suggests rapid burial. Also, there is something known as the Cambrian explosion. What this is that in the Cambrian layer is supposed to be one of the earliest layers of the geologic column, but yet it contains they found a bunch of complex organisms. What scientists are calling complex organisms is a multicellular organism. That's what they call that. A multicellular organism is referred to by scientists as a complex organism, and they found complex organisms in the Cambrian explosions, but there's no evolutionary counterpart to it. There's no evolutionary counterpart. It's one of the earliest layers of the geologic column, and there's a ton of them. But it gets even worse because some of these fossils that they found among the Cambrian explosion are soft shell or soft bodied jellyfish. Why is that important? Because they would deteriorate really fast, decompose really fast. There should be no fossils at all of them. But we find fossils of them. We find them fossilized, which is strong evidence of rapid burial. So when you combine all this evidence, petrified trees, and by the way, we actually know that the sedimentary layers can be deposited really fast. We saw it in the Mount St. Helens eruption, I think it was around the 1980s. I think actually 1980 itself, I think. When it erupted, it created canyons similar to the Grand Canyon. No joke. So yeah, we've actually seen this happen. So yeah, the last column made up. There are sedimentary layers. Don't get me wrong. We're not denying that there's sedimentary layers. We're denying that the actual column, as it exists in textbooks, is false. If it exists in real life, it would be over 200 miles long, which is thicker than the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon's just barely over a mile long, or a mile thick, and it would be deeper than that. It would be thicker than that. So it would actually be twice as thick. So it would be pretty big. But either way, the evidence is very strong in favor of Rapid Barrel. There's actually other evidences of it too, but I'm not going to go into all that. Really and truthfully, this has more to do with the age of Earth controversy than it does with evolution. So I don't know why he's bringing all this up. He brings up a lot of irrelevant stuff that's not relevant to the debate. Let's continue.
Furthermore, we can figure out how old these things are with radiometric dating, another technique that Kent will desperately accuse of being invalid without any basis whatsoever. Isotopic decay rates are constant, and measuring their levels reveals their age. We can corroborate these ages by using multiple nuclides, and when we get the same age using uranium dating as with potassium-argon dating, the notion that these coincidentally offer the same result, not once but thousands of times, is a statistical absurdity.
All right. Radiometric dating. Radiometric dating is based on a number of assumptions, including assuming the rate of decay is constant. He says, oh, well, we know these are constant. No, you don't know that. Unless you can take a time machine back and measure the rate of decay over time, you don't know it's constant. You're assuming it's constant. That's not the same thing. We actually know that it's not constant because it's actually been tested. There was a group of scientists a while back. They call themselves RATE, R-A-T-E. It's an acronym for Radioisotopes and the Age of the Earth. This is their book, very technical. I believe they were led by a physicist by the name of Russell Humphreys, who went out to be able to challenge the assumptions. These team of scientists, they were funded. They went out to challenge the assumptions behind radiometric dating. When they tested uranium-238 to lead dating in granite, okay, there exists uranium-238 dates uranium-238 to lead dates the rocks to like billions of years. I think it's about 3 billion, almost 3 billion. But there's zircon crystals all in these rocks, okay, that they're dating to billions of years, and inside these zircon crystals are loads of helium. Now, helium is a slippery element that can slip through the cracks, and of course, zircon crystals, like any crystals, are porous, and so the helium could easily slip out. And helium is a byproduct of radiometric decay. It's one of the byproducts of radiometric decay. So if it's okay, uranium-238 has a very slow decay rate. All right. So because it has a very slow decay rate, and because it gives off helium, and helium is a very slippery element, after billions of years, there should be no helium left in the zircon crystals, none whatsoever. And there's loads of helium that was found within the zircon crystals. When they dated it properly using helium to see how much helium had come out and tested it to see what it would measure out to, it came to roughly about 6,000 years, roughly. That's interesting. And also another thing that they found out, okay, the helium should escape the surrounding biotite material. That's the surrounding material that's on there. It's biotite. I think it's a form of volcanic ash, I think. It's a very soft type of rock. And the biotite material has actually lots of helium trapped in it as well. So it has lots of helium in the zircon crystal and lots of helium in the biotite. But it should have already skipped the biotite as well. But it gets even worse because it should have already escaped all that and got into the atmosphere. That's actually how we get helium in the atmosphere. But our atmosphere only has about 2% helium in it. 2% of our atmosphere is helium. Some could probably argue that some of it probably escaped space, but not all of it would have. It would have been trapped in our Earth's atmosphere by the gravity. Some might disperse in space, but not all of it. And there's just way too little to have escaped all that. So this actually challenges the assumption that radiometric dating has like the constant rate is the same, has been the same. But there's other assumptions too, like the initial conditions have to be the same as they are today. That's an assumption. All right. For example, okay, the way radiometric dating works is that the parent isotope has to decay into the daughter isotope. Okay, and for that to happen, excuse me. For that to happen, they measure the rate of decay from the parent isotope to the daughter isotope. For them to be able to do that, the daughter isotope has to be 0%. That means all the daughter isotope has to be there through natural decay from the parent isotope, because it was already there beforehand. That messes up the dating method. So, like, for example, in the case of potassium-argon dating, potassium-40 decays to argon-40. And in which case, the assumption is it starts out with the rock starts out with 0% argon-40 in it. Okay, same thing is also true for argon-40, where argon-40 decays to argon-39, and it's assumed that argon-39 it starts out with 0%. All right. Now, in order for that to be the case, okay, all the argon had to have been slipped out before the rock solidified. All the argon had to escape. Now, the assumption is that the argon would have escaped. Now, some of the argon probably would have escaped, but here's the thing. Okay, they've got volcanic rock. Okay, they tested this. The rate team tested it when they did their experiments, but they also referenced that there's secular literature where similar experiments have been done. They're not the only ones, the first ones to ever do this experiment. But they did the experiment as well. But we actually know when the volcanic rock formed. And because radiometric dating, potassium-argon dating, as well as argon-argon dating, always says that this forms at this point of rock forming, because they think all of the argon would have escaped. Or in the case of argon-argon dating, all the argon-39 would have escaped. Then they assume that it starts out with 0%. In the case of potassium-40, or potassium-argon dating, 0% argon-40. Okay? In which case, but then they get dates that are, not only inconsistent with each other, but are off from the actual dates. I mean, anywhere from thousands to millions of years are granted, and they're just completely off the wall in their dating. And we actually know when the eruption occurred, because the rock formed within hours after the volcanic eruption, and since we know when the volcanic eruption happened, we know when the rocks formed. In the case of Mount St. Helens, for example, it formed around 1980, because it happened within a couple hours after the eruption. But yeah, it's showing dates that are completely inconsistent. So when scientists checked into this, they found out that there was extra argon, which they called excess argon, in the sample. That means that all the argon, like in the case of potassium argon dating, not all the argon-40 had escaped. In fact, a ton of it was still left in there. and that messed up the dating method. So what ends up happening is that when it comes to rocks of known ages, they usually say that it's corrupted, or they agree that it's messed up. But then they believe they could trust radiometric dating when it comes to rocks of unknown ages, which I find to be logically inconsistent. I don't agree with that methodology at all. He says that different various radiometric datings always come up with the same answer. No, they don't. Carbon-14 don't come up with the same answer as potassium-40 argon dating. In fact, carbon-14 dates things to thousands of years. It never dates anything in millions of years. That is a misconception. Carbon-14 cannot date anything in millions of years. It never has. In fact, the only type of radiometric dating ever used on organic life form is carbon-14. But it cannot be used on organic life form because they assume that they're millions of years old. You can't date anything with millions of years old with carbon-14. In fact, carbon-14 actually cannot last millions of years old. Carbon-14 can only last up to 92,000 years is what it's estimated. Less than 100,000 years is how long carbon-14 can last. Okay, let me explain the half-life real quick. But before I do that, let me tell you the half-life of carbon-14. Assuming the rate of decay is what they say it is. I don't believe it is. But if it isn't, the situation would be worse. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that it's what they say it is. Well, the half-life of carbon-14 is 5,730 years. 5,730 years. That's which is relatively a short half-life compared to potassium argon half-life, which is over half-life is like over 1 billion years. It's a little over 1 billion years. It's pretty deep. So relative to that, carbon-14 has a very, very short half-life. Now there are things that have much, much less half-life, like polonium halos, for example. Half-life is like a minute, minute and a half, 3 minutes, some of that nature. And of course, polonium halos are found, granted, all over the world, so its half-life is really small. But you got these halos; it emits like, and it's just frozen in granite, which is kind of ironic because if this granite was this molten rock and it's millions of years, there would be no halos there at all. And these halos are found all over the world in granite. So, but and their half-life is anywhere from a half a minute to 3 minutes. So you're talking, depending on what kind of polonium halos you're talking about, and so that's really short. But anyway, back to carbon-14. Its half-life is relatively short compared to most radiometric datings, 5,730 years. Now, the way a half-life works, let's say, sake of argument, let's say 5,730 years pass, half of the sample that's there would be gone. Let's say another 5,730 years happen, another half, and another half, another half, and it'll keep going like that. Now, in theory, it never reaches zero. I don't know why they say that. But in theory, it's supposed to never reach absolute zero in every sense. But it comes so close to it that it becomes immeasurable. That they get to a point where they cannot measure any amounts of carbon-14 at all within the sample. Well, then carbon-14, based on this, based on the assumption of radiometric dating, should not last no more than 92,000 years. It cannot last millions of years, but yet it's being found in things that are they're allegedly millions of years old, like dinosaur fossils and fossil fuels and oil beds and things of that nature. It's been found in all of these things. They're supposed to be millions of years old, but yet it has carbon-14 in them. Oh, it gets worse. Carbon-14 is also found in diamonds. This is something the Ray team found because nobody had checked it before they did. Because the assumption is that there could be no carbon-14 inside diamonds, because once diamonds solidified, they are a closed system. It's impossible to get additional radioisotopes in there. So as a result, there could be no, and they assume that the diamonds are anywhere from hundreds of millions to billions of years old, allegedly forming in the early parts of the Earth. And yet, diamonds had quite abundance of carbon-14 in them. Now, some of the old Earth creationists try to get around this by arguing that carbon or nitrogen 13 can convert to carbon 14, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to use radiometric datings that has very slow half-lives, and they're trying to use it to support something that has a very fast half-life. You can't do that. It'd be kind of like if you have a barrel full of water, you have a big old hole gushing in it, and it's pouring out water like crazy, and you're taking a shot glass, a little small little glass like this, and you're trying to pour water back into it, thinking you're going to fill it up. It's going to lose more water than it's going to gain. You might put a little bit of water, but it's not going to do much of anything. Which is the same thing here, because they found out that it would take about 1 billion times more radiometric dating that we have to produce carbon 14 from nitrogen 13. So it doesn't really work very well as a method trying to replenish the carbon 14 inside diamonds. And trying to add additional radioisotopes don't work because diamonds are the hardest natural substance on the planet. So it becomes a closed system once it solidifies into diamonds. So that becomes a problem. So all of these things don't point to radiometric dating being the friend of the old Earthers or the evolutionists. But what's more important, this has to do with the age of the Earth, I understand why evolutionists need it, because they need that time, but the reality is you could give evolutionists 1 billion years to make evolution happen, and you still can't make it happen. So all of this is really just a red herring, because the reality is evolution possible in the first place? Not that it's possible if you just give enough time. No. Is it possible in the first place? Is it possible? And more importantly, whether it's possible or not, did it happen? That's the question that has to be asked. Let's continue.
You can also compare with unrelated methods like tree ring dating or referencing documented historical events. Radiometric dating works, period. Then with biogeography, we predict the locations of fossils based on the...
All right. Radiometric dating doesn't work. Tree ring dating based on assumptions too. By the way, the oldest tree on Earth is less than 10,000 years old, even by tree ring dating. Tree ring dating is not exact science. It just depends on how fast the tree grows. The more rain you get, the bigger the tree, the more rings you get in a single year. So, yeah, it's just based on a number of assumptions. But even the oldest tree alive is less than 10,000 years old. So it doesn't support millions of years either. And I don't know why he corresponded that with radiometric dating. No radiometric dating would agree with, even the oldest tree alive would not agree with radiometric dating. Okay, he's about to get into the placement of fossils, which is really weird because I guess he's on supercontinent. I do not know why he brings this up. It makes no sense. Let's finish that argument before I respond.
Configuration of prehistoric land masses. And guess what? We do indeed find them there. You can't get more empirical than, I bet I'll find this thing here, and then you look and you do.
All right. Well, actually, you can get more empirical at the beginning, because empirical means that you can observe it, that it's something that can be tested and experimented on, things like that, and can be measured. But anyway, I don't know why he brings that up. Most creationists, I think Kent might reject the idea of a supercontinent. I know he did at one time when he went to prison for a while. He rejected the idea of a supercontinent, but most creationists do acknowledge a supercontinent. And this is something that we've always said. In fact, a creationist is the original person who suggested, I think it's the same guy who originally suggested plate tectonics, because there was a creationist that suggested that originally. So yeah, and they suggested a young that with plate tecton with supercontinent and stuff like that. So I don't know why he brings this up. It makes some sense.
Now, can you say that none of this is proof of anything? Well, proof is exclusively for mathematics and logic, so anyone who asks for proof in science has no idea how science works. In science, we only say that something is consistent beyond reasonable doubt. For example, a very old Earth is consistent beyond reasonable doubt, as is agreed upon by literally all geologists, the people who study the Earth for a living.
All right. He says that they don't speak of proof. That's false. Scientists do speak of proof. And all proof is just evidence. No evidence can ever guarantee the proposition, of course not. But it does support it. And that's what proof is. It's basically just evidence that supports a proposition. And scientists do speak of proof. They speak of proof all the time. They speak of evidence. So this is just completely false. And he says anybody who understands that doesn't understand science. I've actually been told that before by an atheist. It's false. It's completely false. We understand science very well. We do talk because scientists do talk about proof. They talk about evidence. That's what evidence is. All evidence is something. All proof is something is evidence that supports a conclusion or a proposition. Now he's going to get into this appeal to majority fallacy. Appeals to majority fallacy happens in his arguments not only throughout. He'll make it also here in a little bit. He'll make it like 3 times. I counted 3 times that he makes this appeal to majority fallacy in his opening case. He also makes it throughout the debate, including later on. He'll make appeal to authority fallacy. So I don't know if he fully understands what an appeal to majority fallacy is. Ad populum argument. It's also called the bandwagon fallacy. All these things. The fact that even if you have most agree with you, most geologists probably would agree with them. Not all, because we're going to get in that in a second, because that's factually inaccurate anyhow. But most might agree with them, but that doesn't make it true. Okay, that's an appeal to majority fallacy. It is a fallacy in logic. All right. Now, with that said, it is also factually inaccurate to say all geologists agree with him. I'm about to show you some geologists that don't agree with him. This guy right here, John Woodmore, he's a geologist. He wrote the book Noah's Ark: A Feasibility Study. He doesn't agree with him. This guy right here is Andrew Snelling. So I can show the book. Yeah, he wrote the book. There's a 2-volume set. He wrote the book Earth's Catastrophic Past. He's a geologist, a very successful geologist who does work with geologists, but he doesn't agree with them. There's also another geologist, both him, in fact, Andrew Snelling also worked on the Great Project as one of the geologists, and there's actually another geologist who worked on there, Steve Austin, who's also a geologist, and he doesn't agree with them either. Trying to say all geologists are in agreement is just completely false. It is factually inaccurate. It's like he never even bothers studying the fact that we actually have actual scientists, unless he just assumes that our scientists aren't really scientists. They're not real scientists because they don't agree with him. Maybe he's going to do that Bill Nye thing and just assume all the scientists that disagrees with him is incompetent because they disagree with him. All right, let's continue.
So when someone uneducated like Kent says anything the contrary, it is totally baseless and can...
This is ad hominem fallacy, calling Kent uneducated. He does this ad hominem fallacy a lot.
Only be traced back to one piece of supposed evidence. Some book says a thing. Similarly, all biologists agree that evolution by natural selection is consistent beyond reasonable doubt. But Kent will say, some book says a thing.
Okay, some book says a thing. No, that we actually have evidence outside the Bible. Kent actually agrees with that. He'll say that later, that it's not, even if the Bible didn't say that, it wouldn't matter because we actually have reasons beyond the Bible to argue for this. So it's not like, oh, that's the only reason why we believe this. I don't just believe evolution. In fact, the Bible, some of my reasons for disagreeing with the evolution comes from the Bible, But most of my reasons for disagreeing with evolution comes outside of the Bible. So it isn't just because of the Bible. All right. He mentioned just a second ago all biologists' agreement with him. I was reading an article earlier on that where talk about the E. coli bacteria, and he thinks that this, I told you earlier about this, producing some synthetic life, when in reality it didn't produce life at all. It went through one form of bacteria to another, and it does so by taking away information. And I read an article on that, actually, by a scientist. A scientist by the name of Georgia Purdium. She is a young Earth creationist scientist, and she's a biologist. She doesn't agree with you. So it's factually inaccurate. It's also an ad populum argument. It is the argument from majority. It's trying to argue that most, or in this case, he thinks all, which is not all, but yeah, even if it was, whether it is or not, or most, it wouldn't make a difference, because that doesn't make something true. Well, you're going to disagree with the majority. Okay. There's times when the majority's right, and there's times when they're wrong. It's just when the times are wrong. Evolution has dominated these areas. Okay. So, doesn't make them right. You gotta look at the arguments. You gotta look at the evidence. That's what you gotta look at. Let's continue. All right. They deal with the Big Bang Theory and things like that. Let's just move ahead through them, because I don't. They're not really that relevant to the subject matter of evolution. He's already dealt with issues that they're outside the realm of what they even were debating. So let's go. Let's move ahead. Okay, he mischaracterized our position, because he thinks that we think that planets and stars went out from the Big Bang. As far as what the Big Bang Theory, it's not even our position, but we don't argue that they have that position either. So he misunderstood that. So okay. This is another place where he does appeal to majority fallacy. He will argue that all astronomers agree. No, all astronomers don't agree. This book right here, written by Dr. Jason Lyle, who's an astronomer, he doesn't agree. Neither does Danny Faulkner, who's also an astronomer. Arguing that all astronomers agree is factually inaccurate. There are astronomers that are young Earth creationists that don't agree with that. They don't agree with Big Bang cosmology and so forth. And by the way, there's even some secular astronomers. Fred Hoyle, for example, the inventor of the steady state theory, a very famous astronomer. In fact, I think he's actually the first one to coin the term Big Bang in the first place. And he didn't agree with the Big Bang all the way until his dying day. He was a secularist, he was an atheist. And there's even some atheists today. And there's actually models that they've come up with to compete with the theory of evolution, or the model to compete with the Big Bang. And because they don't agree with, and some of these are atheists, and they don't agree with the Big Bang Theory. Now they're trying to make the universe eternal in some way, a lot of times, but they can't do it. But still, just the same, and they're not agreeing with the Big Bang Theory. I don't think it's accurate to say all astronomers are in agreement. It's just not right. And it's a appeal to the majority policy anyhow. Okay, he talks about fusion inside stars, which of course fusion happens inside stars. Most creationists acknowledge that. The issue is whether or not you can fuse all the periodic tables, so I don't think he fully understands the argument that Kent has on that. stellar. uh, he talks about star formation. Gravity exists. He says stars explode. Again, gravity exists. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Gravity exists, yes, but that don't mean that automatically that's the reason that it would create star formation. No, because gravity doesn't exist in gas clouds. Gravity would only take effect after the stars are already formed. Stars exploding wouldn't be able to explain the first stars forming in the first place, because that seems to suggest you need stars to form other stars. So it wouldn't show how the first stars got formed in the first place. So it just, these are kind of arguments he presents, but none of these have to do with evolution. But he just throws that out there. They don't really talk about it much during the debate. Okay, he says that he makes it sound like, he doesn't explicitly say it, but he makes it sound like we observe star formation, which we don't. No scientist would ever say that we actually observe star formations, or just about no science. I mean, there are a few that might suggest that, but it's more than what scientists actually say, because even if star formations happen, they would happen over a course of millions and billions of years beyond a human lifetime to observe. But we should observe some kind of thing in the process of the steps, but we don't see that. We don't observe that. Again, he makes the pill the majority fallacy, and he's wrong. He says all astrophysicists agree. They don't agree with him. John Arnett and Alex Williams. It's called Dismantling the Big Bang. Dr. Jason Lau, that I mentioned earlier, that's an astronomer, has a PhD in astrophysics. That's what astronomers do. They have PhDs in astrophysics. He doesn't agree with him. So all astronomers do not agree. All astrophysicists do not agree with him. Most probably do. Okay, most probably do. Like I said, evolution has dominated many areas of the fields of science. But that would not make it true. And again, it commits the pill of authority fallacy. Trying to get through here, there's one point where he talks about abiogenesis. When we get to that, we will discuss it. Again, he seems to think that the only reason we believe what we believe is the Bible, but it's not. There are other reasons. Alright, here it is. Alright, let's talk about this. He's going to talk about organic evolution, and he's going to say the origin of living organisms. Alright, let's go.
Came about on Earth. This is called abiogenesis, and plenty of work has been done here. In the 50s, it was shown that amino acids form spontaneously in early...
The Miller array experiment. The Miller array experiment was not a success. It's often held as a success by evolutionists, which is completely false. The Miller array experiment, Miller based it on earlier research of a guy named Urey. That's why Urey got half the credit, and so it became known as the Miller array experiment. Basically, he created some amino acids by shooting it with electricity, and put them in a situation in which amino acids would develop, and when amino acids did develop, said, there, I've created life. Of course, they've created biological molecules in laboratory experiments before. They created artificial urine, for example, or urine. They created, not artificial, but they created urine in a laboratory. Creating biological molecules doesn't mean you create life. It takes a lot more. As one scientist said, you could put a frog in a blender and blend them, all his guts all in the blender, and in that blender you have all the ingredients to make a frog, and you still be nowhere near creating life, even though you have all the ingredients. But here's the thing. Miller array experiment actually produced both left-handed and right-handed amino acids. It also produced a kind of a red goo that was very harmful to the amino acids, and they had to remove it. Now, before I get into why that's relevant, I'm also going to get into what it was based on, because it was based on an assumption that the early Earth's atmosphere had no oxygen in it. But the evidence that we found in rocks, both during that time and that since, The evidence is deepest down we can go in rocks. We've always found evidence of oxidation. Oxidation is when oxygen affects certain things, especially organic objects, but even inorganic objects like rocks can get oxidized. Oxidation would be like if you bit into an apple and suddenly it starts turning brown, dark brown, from its exposure to the air. And what it is oxygen starts killing these cells and stuff. Well, oxygen is also harmful to amino acids. Any exposed amino acids. So they assume that if life started naturally, then there must be no oxygen. But the evidence shows that as far back as we can go, it appears that we've always had oxygen on this planet. Well, oxygen would have destroyed any exposed amino acids. Abiogenesis cannot occur. It also violates the law of biogenesis, which says life can only come from life. You can't get a life from non-living material like that. It's a violation of the law of biogenesis. Okay, what's more is when he did the experiment, he did the electricity, it produced this red goo, which turned out to be harmful to the amino acids. So he had to figure out a way to filter out the red goo. Guess what? That's intelligence. He had to apply intelligence. The whole point of the experiment is to show how things could happen naturally without intelligence, but he applies intelligence to the experiment, to do the experiment and to remove the harmful toxic material that was toxic to the amino acids. What's more, he created right-handed amino acids as well as left-handed. Okay, amino acids come into two different categories, left and right hand. I know the camera is showing kind of a mirror image. This is actually my left hand. This is actually my right hand. But mirror things that have properties that are considered handed properties, I believe the term is cryon, is when the objects in question are mirror each other, like exactly like, except they're mirror of each other, mirror opposites. Well, left-handed, for reasons we do not know, all protein molecules that go into creating a living cell, all living life-creating proteins that go into making a living cell are made entirely 100% of living or left-handed amino acids. We don't know why. They're made 100% of left-handed amino acids. What's really weird is that DNA and RNA are made of right-handed amino acids, which is kind of weird. But all of the protein molecules that go into making a living cell is 100% left-handed. If you add right-handed amino acids to it, it will not function as a living cell. In fact, it won't be alive at all. But there was left-handed amino acids as well as right-handed amino acids present in the experiment. So he was nowhere near close to creating life. So this is completely faulty. It's misleading. I wish they had talked about that a little bit more than they did, but they didn't. It wasn't really relevant to much of their discussion. But anyway, of course their time was very limited. They can't talk about everything. But let's continue.
Earth conditions, and the same is known for nucleotides. Ribonucleotides polymerize on hot clay to produce RNA, and we've observed ribozymes which have catalytic function and thus offer an early mode of self-replication. Amino acids must also polymerize to form proteins, and there are several viable hypotheses as to how this happened. If Kent is interested in discussing organometallic catalysis, I would be happy to elucidate further.
All right. Again, duplication of information, not adding of information. I want to show you something real quick. I want to show you something, a quote from a guy by the name of Werner Gitt. He's an information scientist. It involves whether or not, if any natural process, if any material mechanism has ever been known to give rise to information. Because he argues this, Professor Dave argues this throughout this entire debate. And I'm going to cite this real quick. Alright. Now, just to let you know, I'm not just simply getting this from the internet. I actually have Dr. Werner Gitt's book, In the Beginning Was Information. So I'm actually citing this directly from his book. I got the pages actually marked, and I cited them here too if you want to look them up. All right, this is what Dr. Wernick is a information scientist. So this is coming straight out of information science and everything we observe as far as from information science. This is what he says. There is no known natural law through which matter can give rise to information. Neither is any physical process or material phenomenon known that can do this. There is no known law of nature, no known process, and no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. We're going to get in the beginning was information, pages 79 and 106. There is no known natural mechanism that can cause that. To argue that that a material process can give rise to information, that somehow additional information can be added from a natural process, requires evidence, which we do not have. And he argues throughout this debate. He will argue that a new species being created, new information. No, it's not new information. It's the same old information being isolated. Natural selection, by the way, doesn't create anything new either. Christians do believe in natural selection, in case you're wondering. Yes, we do agree with natural. In fact, it was a Christian originally that came up with natural selection. And Charles Darwin kind of stole. Charles Darwin is kind of like this plagiarizer. He takes all these different things people have already done and came up with, and he puts them together in his own theory and popularized it and that sort of thing. That's why I always call him the ultimate plagiarizer. But anyway, there was actually a Christian originally that actually came up with the idea of natural selection originally. We agree with natural selection. But natural selection is a selective process. It selects from the genome, the genetic material that's already there. It isolates that material. And that's all it does. Natural selection. Let's say you take a population of bees and you spray them with a pesticide. Alright? Now, this is going to sound very, very complicated. And I'm being very sarcastic because it's not very complicated. It's very logical. But the bees that are naturally resistant to the pesticide is going to survive. And the bees that are not resistant to the pesticide will die. Oh, it gets even more complicated because the bees that are not that are resistant to the pesticide that don't die, they're going to go on to breed bees with the same information to be resistant to the pesticide. Not very complicated at all. I was being very sarcastic on that. It's not very complicated. It's very logical, obviously. But all natural selection did was select with the information that's already there. There was no new information there. It wasn't bees who was not resistant suddenly become resistant. That's a false misclassification of natural selection. The bees that were already resistant survived, and because they didn't die because they were resistant. But they had those genes and they were able to breed bees that also held that resistance to the pesticide. So that's natural selection. Mutations, he brings up later on as well. He doesn't bring it up much here. He brings up a little bit. But mutations don't add anything new as well. It doesn't add new information. What mutations do is they take away information from the cell, or they corrupt, or they scroll around the information that's already there. But many harmful diseases, such as cancer, form because of mutations. Mutations do not create anything new. Notice when he talked about mutations before, he talked about animals getting wings and all kinds of interesting stuff happening and things like that. None of it was added information. I don't think he understands what we mean when we say information needs to be added. Again, like I said, it has to be new information, which is information that was not present before the change. So it's not just simply the information is there and you take away this information and this is left. That's not new information. New information is when the information is not there at all but is now there. It's being presented there. Well, that's it for this debate review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. Like the video. That helps with the YouTube algorithm, gets this information out there better. It helps YouTube understand that people want this content. Also, subscribe to my channel. I produce this kind of content all the time. Don't forget to hit that notification bell. That's very important in order to receive this. And if you want to see more videos about evolution and things of that nature, in the flood, I would love to go a video over the evidence for the global flood. By all means, leave a comment section. Let me know if you want to see more videos like this in the future. I will certainly be trying to produce videos like this. And so let me know in the comment section below. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe. And it really always comes down to the facts. Because we ultimately should always know these facts, learn them, and to be able to teach others, and to be able to move these intellectual doubts, standing in the way of someone accepting Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. So, and it's always my job to keep you in the know, because it is. I always want to teach you to learn to know the facts, that the critics don't want you to know. I'll see you next time.